a Sun Prairie resident. I live at 1514 Boulder Way. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. It's nice to have everybody in the room together. I'm just thinking, it was great having the presentation of what would we call it? I want to call it a certificate. The proclamation. That's the word I'm trying to get. The proclamation. But wouldn't it be great? I'm not this is not meant as a criticism because this is wouldn't be prudent at this time. But wouldn't it be great when we get to the point where you do one of those proclamations and then the people get to walk around and shake everybody's hand?
It's interesting you said that. I've forgotten about that, Bill. It's been 2 years.
Right.
My attention span
Well, that'll be a someday thing. I wouldn't say it's right now, but someday. Let's hope for that.
Good point, Bill.
Yes, and the other thing, the introductory comment I'll make is it's only 2 days until St. Patrick's Day. That's fine, right? So, without further ado, I'll get into my comments about the parking ordinance. And what I'm going to do, well, let me back up for a moment. Let me tell you a little bit about Smart Growth Greater Madison. So, Smart Growth was formed in the early 2000s by a group of Madison real estate developers. And over time, it's now the Greater Madison Smart Growth. So we pay attention to what's going on in other communities in Dane County. And the reason Smart Growth was created was to be able to provide local governments with accurate and relevant information about public policy proposals that would impact real estate development. So, if you have a very, very capable staff, but your capable staff has never done real estate development. You have, people, very, very capable people on your committees, but the vast majority of them have never done or managed large real estate. And so we provide that perspective so that you have that balance of information. And that's why I'm here today, to speak with you. So what I'm going to do is talk about some examples in Madison. And the reason they're relevant is that it is my understanding, and by looking at the ordinance, I can confirm this, that the ordinance before you is very similar to the ordinance that's on the books in Madison. So this will provide you with sort of what it's going to look like if you pass this ordinance. All right? So this first example is an office building in a large office park on the west side of Madison. It was a new multi-tenant office building, 117,000 square feet of commercial office space. So big building, all right? And the Madison ordinance, like the proposed ordinance you're considering, would require a one-bike parking space per 2,000 square feet. So that would work out to be 58.5 outdoor guest parking spaces. The developer went to the city and said that's an awful lot of spaces to try to put outside our front door of our building. So what we were proposing to do is we think that the bike parking would be much better if it were indoor. It could be used by the employees of the commercial tenants of the building. It's a multi-tenant building. So they were going to put 24 indoor bike parking spaces. And they negotiated with the city staff, and they got down to, so that the outdoor is at 58.5 or 12. Okay? The outdoor bike racks are rarely used at this site and at other sites within this business park. And relatively few employees of the tenants use the indoor bike racks. So this is when the developer was making the case to the city to reduce the bike parking requirement. This is the information they provided. This is quoting verbatim from the report the developer gave to Madison City staff. And you can see that each one of those addresses is a big office building. All right, so there are racks in front of each one of those big office buildings. And the group that's on Excelsior Drive, when they looked at it 3 different times, 3 different days, 3 different times a day, during business hours, during the months of August, September, and October, 1 bike or less at all the properties combined were on those outside racks. The ones on Deming Way, 2 bikes or less at all those properties. The ones on John Q. Hammond's Drive, 1 bike or less at all the properties combined on each one of those days. So there's a lot of bike racks out there, not many of them being used any day. So here's a photo of the building where the developer requested the variance. So there, you can see those round hoops there at the bottom, those are bike racks. And so there's several of those installations along the front to provide the 12 bike parking spaces. And then this is what one of the installations look like inside the underground parking facility. There's four like that within the building. And each one takes up about the size of a handicap parking spot within the underground parking facility. I want to point out, draw your attention particularly to this slide, because the City of Madison, neither the City of Madison ordinance nor the proposed ordinance you are considering requires indoor bike parking in an office building. Neither one does. So why is this developer, manager of an office building putting this in there at their expense and taking up, there's a waiting list. There's a waiting list for parking spots for vehicles in that underground parking facility. Why did they put it there? Because they thought it would help them market space to tenants, to big commercial tenants. And why would big commercial tenants want this? Because they're in competition for talent. So if they think that they need indoor bike parking spaces to be able to get employees, they're going to ask the owner of the building, and the owner of the building is going to build that into the lease. That's how this happens without need of any government intervention. All right, so another case study. This one on the south side of Madison. This one, they weren't able to get any sort of variance. I don't know if they didn't ask or what the deal was. But they didn't have as many, they don't have as many big office buildings, so maybe they just didn't have the data to show that it really wasn't needed. But anyway, on the south side of Madison, a new large multi-tenant office building, the Madison ordinance required 54 outdoor bike parking spaces for guests. Again, the developers wanted to put indoor bike parking spaces because they think that's what the tenants want and that's what their employees will use. And so they were saying, hey, can we get credit for that? And the City of Madison said, well, we'll give you credit for 5 in the 17. So they ended up with 49 outside and 17 inside for a total of 66. And once again, the outdoor bike parking spaces for guests are rarely used. This is what it looks like. This is the building, in front of the building, front entrance. You can see there's a couple of stanchions there for bikes near the front door. Okay. And if you can see in this photo, in the right, the bottom right by the cars, right in front of cars, there's a bunch of bike racks with no bikes in front of them. I took these today, by the way. And so here's, that was on the right side of the building, here's on the left side of the building, here's some more bike racks. And further down the left side of the building, here's more bike racks. If you're going to try to put 49 bike parking spaces, if you try to put them in all in the same spot, by the front door, you would have to, all your vehicle parking would be way, way away from the front door. So they're scattering around. Oh, there's one more. There's one more. This is the entrance to the underground parking garage. And they threw a few back there because they were literally running out where to put these. So this is an illustration of what happens when you leave the number very, very high and don't grant a variance. So, I mean, there's one way to deal with this. You could leave the ordinance just as it is, and then have developer after developer come in and say, we need a very large variance from what is in your ordinances. For those of you who have been on the council for a while, you remember that's how it was for our vehicle parking ordinance. We had way more, the City of Sun Prairie mandated way more vehicle parking spaces than was needed. And so every developer would get a big variance, and it was like, it looked kind of ridiculous, right? So we changed, when I was on the council, we scaled back those vehicle parking requirements, and I would suggest you do the same with this ordinance. So those are my examples that I have for you of what's going on in Madison. I'm suggesting to you based on this information, that you make 3 changes, and I think they're very modest changes, to the proposed ordinance. So number 1 would be to reduce the short-term outdoor bike parking requirement for multifamily buildings from 1 space per 10 units to 1 space per 20. I apologize, I was not able to get a photograph of any of the large apartment buildings in Madison that have this requirement. But I will tell you that I've sat through Madison Plan Commission meetings and seen members of the Plan Commission say that, no, we want closer to the entrance, they're trying to, it's, okay. But if you think about it, a 70 unit or an 80 unit apartment building, if it's 10 per, 1 space per 10 units, that'd be 7 or 8 outdoor bike parking spaces for each apartment building. And so if it's a 3 building complex, each one of those buildings would have 7 or 8 outdoor bike parking spaces. And our experience of our members is very rarely does anybody ride a bike to visit somebody in their apartment building. It just isn't done very frequently. You have in the ordinance, and Madison has in its ordinance, indoor bike parking requirements for the residents of the apartment, and those get used. Those make sense. But you could get away with less than what's in your ordinance and still have ample for guests coming over. Also recommending for the outdoor short-term bike parking for office buildings, reducing that from 1 space per 2,000 to 1 space per 10,000. So if you've got a 100,000 square foot office building, that would still be 10 outdoor parking spaces, which would be still way more than needed. I recognize that this part about the office buildings could be just kind of a theoretical exercise, because once somewhere you're going to get a 100,000 square foot office building, but we can hope, right? We can always dream. Okay. And the other one, this is an abundance of caution, all right? So staff has already said that you don't really need what we're suggesting here, because they would interpret the ordinance to include a storage locker that's got a floor area as big as a bike storage locker. The issue is this staff won't always be here. And so our experience in Madison is each different staff member in Madison has a different interpretation of their ordinances. Literally, I just did a project just like this with another staff member. Well, that's another staff member. That's not me. And so I urge you to make this very, very clear and adopt this. The staff says it's not necessary, but I urge you to adopt it nonetheless. It doesn't do any harm, and it makes the ordinance clear. So those are my recommendations. I will acknowledge, I just showed you photos today of empty bike racks. I will acknowledge that, of course, those bike racks are empty because of the time of the year, but I didn't know you were going to do this ordinance, so I didn't go out last summer and take pictures. So I'm sorry. I don't have a time machine. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So we also have city staff that presented to us.